and welcome to part 2 of the Masters of the Universe 2000X mini statues, or Staticons as they're known. I'm going to start talking about the only snakeman that I have that I have from the mini statues, and that's Tung Lashor. There were 2 more snakemen made in the statue form which I don't have, and that would be Snakeface and Squeeze. So Tung Lashor was the only one that I managed to get. He comes with a plastic stand, which in his case I don't really use because he's so massive and he's able to pretty much stand on his feet without a danger of him falling over. And Tung Lashor here came with a crossbow, just like in the vintage line, that's shaped like an insect, like a flying insect. So it looks pretty decent and very nicely done. And you can see the details also on the wings. And it would be attached in one of his hands, but again, the problem with the statues is in some of them the weapons don't really stand very firm once you put them in the hands. They usually fall over because they're too heavy for the hands. So again, I'd have to display this without him holding it, which is a pity. It would look nicer if he was able to hold it. Now, the other thing about Tung Lashor here is the fact that he does not come with the snake stuff that he would have if he was that he had in the vintage form. So let's put the leader in front for a comparison size, because in the cartoon Tung Lashor is supposed to be very big and bulky in size compared to his vintage version where he wasn't this big. So this is King Hiss, the leader of the Snakemen, in his design of the 2000X cartoon. So this is how he looked like. He had some articulation and he had his snake form hidden under the skin, under his human skin. But more about him as a figure another time. Let's just use him this time for a comparison's sake. So let's just turn things a bit. There we go. So that would be the size between them. So Tung Lashor appears to be quite large, which he's supposed to be, compared to King Hiss, who is definitely smaller in size. So that matches of what we have seen in the cartoon. And this is the snake stuff I'm talking about that even Tung Lashor should have had, aside from the crossbow, but he doesn't. So this is the kind of snake stuff that most of the snakemen would carry in battle, except for Cobra Khan, which is another snakeman who for some reason never carried the stuff himself. Anyway, going back to Tung Lashor here, if some of you know or remember that the vintage version of Tung Lashor actually had an action feature that when you roll a knob on his, or a button on his back, he would stick his snake tongue out and he could roll it back in. But since the statues don't have that feature, then in this case the only thing that was done is having his tongue molded like it's coming completely out. And in the cartoon the tongue is very sticky and you can capture enemies and hold them tight with just the tongue and fling them around and throw them away. So his tongue was sort of modified, at least in this particular version, because he has these claws or like sharp teeth or something growing on the sides of the tongue, which was not the case in the past. And of course he has enormous feet with the 3 clawed toes. Same goes for his hands. He has 3 clawed fingers. But to me, whenever I looked at his face, even in the vintage line, he always resembled more of a something like a mutated version of a frog and a snake. Not so much the snake and not so much the frog. He was to me always somewhere in between. And this tongue, especially for the fact of being sticky and so forth, would remind me more of a frog tongue rather than a snake tongue. But of course the only thing that would give you an idea it may be a snake tongue is the being two-forked at the tip of it. But I always viewed Tung Lashor as a sort of a mix between a snake and a frog, some kind of a strange mutation between the two. On his buckle here he also has the insignia that he belongs to the Snakeman clan, and he has one on his chest. And he's painted in his original colors, the way he's supposed to look. He also has enormous battle bracelets on both wrists, and he's having a sort of an armor going over his body, while his vintage version never had an armor. It was just a chest painted yellow, as if it's part of his skin. But here it's sort of more sculpted to look like an actual armor that goes over him. So that's Tung Lashor, everyone. Now, to continue in this trend of large statues, there is one more that I will show you, and that would be Clawful, the crustacean evil warrior of Skeletor. In his vintage version, for some of you who remember the 80s, he was quite skinny and more of a regular body size, but in the 2000X cartoon series, he was made to be enormous, just like Tung Lashor, very bulky and big. And he comes with his light green mace that looks pretty much the same as a Mossman's mace would look. And I don't put it in his clawed hand because these kinds of weapons don't really stay, in the case of some of these statues, they don't really stay or fit very well in their hands, and they usually fall out easily. They're quite loose in that sense. So I simply got tired of putting it back and forth, so all I did is really just put it beside him, because there is no other way to display it. It's a pity that he cannot hold it properly. But that's the case with at least several statues in this line. He also comes with a hexagon plastic stand, which I don't use in his case because he's quite big and he's able to stand. And this enormous claw of his that is his major weapon would kind of use as an additional support for him to stand firmly. But this is how he looked in the 2000X, and you can already notice his face is much more meaner, angrier looking, and with very sinister eyes. But even though he looks definitely like an evil type of warrior and whatnot, in the cartoon he was presented more as all strength and no brains. He was practically shown as being rather stupid for an enormous creature. And but he would be quite a fighter in a fight against the He-Man and his friends. Other than that, there is other improvements over the vintage, that his claw is now extremely exaggerated in size, so it's much bigger and nastier looking. And if this was, of course, a toy, which it isn't, then there would be an action feature just like with the vintage one to somehow make the claw open and close, which would have been interesting to see. And there is a great deal of detail of cracks and all sorts of little knobs and things of that sort all along his claw, which can probably indicate how old Clawful himself is, because he must have been around a long time. He comes from a tribe of clawed men, I believe. I don't know how else to call that tribe. They all look like Clawful, but they're just in different sizes and in heights, and I think he's one of them that has the largest claw among them. And he has a very nice textured crab armor covering his back and the front, and that's very nice to see. There is a lot of detail in it, the way it was done, some scratches from the fights, I assume, and some cracks in the shell, everything to add more to the detail of the character. And at the front we would also see a sort of a thinner looking armor that covers his chest and the stomach, and the front and the back, of course, is connected over the shoulders. His belt is not an ordinary belt that has only a typical generic buckle in the middle. It's this time around it's showing his clawed hand as the symbol. And the loincloth is not a furry one, it's also quite different and in design and looking very different. And he also has a bracelet on his left wrist and some shin guards on his feet. He's quite impressive, I have to admit, but as I said, the only real pity here is that he is not a figure. I say all the time for all these statues that same point, and I really wish they were made into figures rather than statues. It would have been so much better, but it was just not meant to be. But let's see at least one thing compared, as I spoke about the large statues, him and Tung Lashor side by side, how massive they really are, and they're roughly the same height and size pretty much. The only difference is Tung Lashor has a sort of a larger head. So what we see here, the two of them facing each other, and as you can tell they're definitely the same height, with the only small difference aside from the head size is that Tung Lashor is a more in a more crouched position than Clawful. But other than that, I think they both look superb in every way, especially for the fact that they're huge in size and quite heavy. So they look pretty good, and they go very well with the 2000X figures, posing with them, at least. So that's as far as these guys go. Now the last one that I'm going to talk about in this video would be Stinkor, another evil warrior of Skeletor that never made it in a toy form for the 2000X, but he made it as a statue, and he did had numerous episodes in the cartoon where he showed up. As some of you know, in the vintage He-Man cartoon from the 80s, Stinkor never made an appearance in the entire cartoon series. The creators of the Filmation cartoon version of He-Man were thinking that maybe he was not a very appropriate character to be put in a children's cartoon, so he was completely avoided. He did had some appearances in the mini comics from that time about He-Man, so he was not completely excluded. The only thing was that he was not included in the old cartoon. But in the 2000X, he had quite a number of appearances fighting on the side of Skeletor. Now, that same cartoon series of the 2000X would show the origin of Stinkor, which was never really shown before. So this particular story tells the origin, one of the episodes tells his origin, where he comes from, and how he became what he is. According to the cartoon, and some spoilers are coming ahead, so if you guys don't like to really hear some of this, you can just skip this section. He used to be a very small sized furry creature he was able to walk on his legs, because on his front legs, and he came from a village of such creatures deep in Internian forest that they all pretty much looked very much alike, and they were all furry creatures. They kind of remind me of Ewoks from Star Wars, with some features of skunks mixed in, so they were kind of like hybrids of the two. And they were a peaceful village. I understand that it was just one single village, there was not more of them out there. It was just a single village under an elderly chieftain who was their leader, and they would be mostly farmers and just minding their own business. They were not warlike in any sense or violent in any way. And Stinkor back then was, as I said, member of that village, and he was much smaller in height and not looking anything like this. So the only difference between him and the rest of the village is that he was very mischievous and always up to some bad things on his mind, either to cause trouble to his own fellow villagers or things of that sort, until one time he was simply exiled from the village for causing too much trouble. And instead of learning a valuable lesson from that so that he can return back to the village, he decided he will pursue the road of becoming an evil warrior, because he had a huge admiration for Skeletor and evil warriors, and his lifelong dream was to join them one day. So he managed to go all the way to the Snake Mountain. He bumped into Triclops, one of the warriors of Skeletor, who in the cartoon series is a warrior and a strategist of a sort, and also a scientist who is able to invent new weapons and things of that sort. So Oedipus approached him, tried to speak to him, tried to coax him to see if he can recommend him to Skeletor. Of course, Triclops was very irritated and annoyed with him, so he just chased him away. But Oedipus was not giving up on the idea, so he tried once more. He sneaked into the Snake Mountain when Triclops was not there, and he sneaked into Triclops' lab and decided he will try and create something that will leave such an impression on Triclops that he would immediately recommend him to Skeletor and he would be accepted, no questions asked. Now, of course, Oedipus, not knowing anything about science or things of that sort, he messed things very badly, because he concocted some chemicals that were not supposed to mix, and he caused an enormous explosion. Triclops came running in to see what was that all about, and out of all that smoke and fire, Oedipus came transformed, looking like this, what you see in front of you. Of course, at that moment when he mutated into Stinkor, he did not have any armor. He was completely bare with only some loincloth around him. Aside from looking very strong and looking very aggressive in his mutated form, he also had a very bad smell and stink floating all around his body, that he himself was not able to control it, and then Triclops also tried to throw him out. But Skeletor decided to give him a test and maybe reconsider accepting him into the group. So he gave him a task to destroy, and if not destroy, at least be used as a decoy to keep He-Man away while Skeletor and the rest attack the palace. So it's for a while Stinkor was able to do the job and keep He-Man busy, but in the end, of course, he lost, and He-Man saved the day. And even though he partially failed in his mission, or in the end he actually completely failed in it, Skeletor was not willing to throw him out. He decided to keep him. He asked Triclops to build him a self-containment unit in the shape of that armor and in the shape of these gas tanks at the back, so that Stinkor can use them to control his power and to use them only at appropriate moments. He also had these large size bracelets built for him, so that when he attacks, he would be able to release his smelly poisonous gas at the enemies. So that's how Oedipus ceased to exist, and his lifelong dream of joining Skeletor's crew came true in the end, and he became a permanent member. Now, Oedipus' character did come out packaged as an accessory with one of these statues, except that particular statue I don't have. He did not come with Stinkor, which was really bad. He should have come together with him packaged in one place, but instead they released Oedipus. And by the way, Oedipus in a case of statues would be probably roughly about that size, kind of like size of Orc or thereabouts. So he was packaged as an accessory with another evil warrior that was made into a statue called Jitsu. Some of you who are not familiar with many of these characters, Jitsu is supposed to be another evil warrior of Skeletor, dating back to the original series and the toy line in the 80s. And Jitsu was known to have a very enlarged hand that was covered in gold, and he was able to chop his enemies with it. So that particular statue I don't have, and that's the one where Oedipus came packaged in together with the warrior. Now there is other statues among the Skeletor's warriors that I didn't manage to get. As I already said in my first video, I have maybe roughly half, but the other half I never got. So the one from the Skeletor's forces that I miss in a statue form is, and that were released, is Jitsu, whom I already mentioned, and also Webstor. Webstor is a similar type of character to Clawful, and he's more of a mutated spider who is able to stand on his front legs, and he's not as bulky as Clawful, but he's equally menacing, and he has some extra spider legs on his back. So those are the two that I don't have as far as Skeletor's evil warriors come. So that would be Webstor and Jitsu and the mini size Oedipus. As far as the Snakemen go, aside from Tung Lashor, there were two more released, which unfortunately I don't have as well, and that would be the Snakeface, who is able to turn enemies into stone with the snakes that pop out of his body, and he was based on a character from the Greek legends called Medusa, which was a woman snake who had the same powers of using her snakes that were there instead of her hair to turn the enemies into stone. So, and the second one would be Squeeze. He's also a snakeman that I don't have from the statues at least. He is again, he's able to stand on his front legs, and he has more of a crocodile-shaped head and enormous long arms that he can grip his enemies and pretty much tighten his grip on them. Now, there are two more statues from Skeletor's warriors that I will cover in the next video, and that would be the evil Lyn, who is a sort of an evil sorceress that works for Skeletor, but more about her and the variant version of her in the next video. This is all for now. I hope you guys enjoyed my prolonged talk here, but I just wanted to make sure I didn't miss any details about these statues. And that's about it for now. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you guys again next time with another video in regards to the remaining statues that I have. Thanks, and see you guys later. Bye.